Welcome to Psych One-on-One on therapycable.com. I'm Julianne Goode, and my guest today is Elizabeth Rivas. We are going to be talking about youth and violence in America and the statistics and what's going on in our country with violence in youth. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Could you tell our audience a little bit about your background?
Sure. It's a little extensive, but I was a volunteer domestic violence victim advocate with the Santa Ana Police Department for 3 years. I got a job at Santa Ana PD as a detention officer, and I worked in the jail as a corrections officer. I also have experience as a sexual assault victim advocate with Community Services Program, and I was actually stationed at the District Attorney's Office. And currently, I just finished my master's degree at Argosy University, so I will be doing therapy with victims of crime. And that's where I'm at right now.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
The first question I would like to ask you is, what is the biggest concern with youth and violence today, in your opinion?
Well, my husband is a Santa Ana police officer, and he works in the gang unit, and so I've been working alongside with him and working with a lot of the schools in Santa Ana, and everyone knows that there's a big problem with gangs in Santa Ana. And even though Orange County, that's not the first thing you think of is gang problems, it is a major issue. I was doing therapy with clients, and the age range was from 9 to 12 years old, male Hispanics. And the one thing that I just thought was a huge issue was the problem with video games. And not only the amount of time that they're spending on video games, but the content. And unfortunately, a lot of the parents don't really understand the ratings that the video games have. So I would have 9-year-old males playing 5 to 6 hours of video games on a rated M for mature. And the parents were pretty much clueless and didn't know what that means. And they're the ones who bought it for them. So that is a huge problem.
So in that case, would you say that it's the youth were being influenced by advertising, by what their other friends were playing, or their older siblings, and therefore they thought, well, okay, I want to be cool and I want to be playing on these games also?
That has a lot to do with it, and I do have to say I give kudos to the marketing people for video games, because when the new edition of, let's say, Black Ops came out, people were camping out the night before waiting to buy that video game. And again, the parents are buying the video games, but they don't understand the content. And just randomly, I looked up on the computer the rating for one of the video games that one of my clients was playing, and it said extreme violence, language, nudity, the characters have sex with each other. And when I actually saw the actual video game, it was so very violent, to the point where they're using guns and they're blowing people's heads off and there's blood everywhere. And that's where the problem lies, is that the intensity in the amount of violence that they are witnessing is desensitizing these young minds. So for them to get in a fight at school, it really doesn't faze them. They don't think anything's wrong with that. And the other thing is, it's teaching the children to use violence as a way to cope with things, as a way to settle things, and that's a very big problem.
Especially the desensitization of it. That's a huge problem, I would imagine, especially, with 5 to 6 hours worth of viewing a day. They get almost into that world, and they're part of it. At least their brains are part of that, and they're not old enough to have those kind of coping skills to be able to weed out, okay, this is fantasy, this is reality. When the game is turned off, I need to behave in a different manner because they're so consumed with these games. Would you agree?
I agree. And then the other aspect of this is if there's already violence in the home, for example, domestic violence, now it's in two different places. They're actually seeing in real life parents are fighting, hitting one another, and then in the video games, it's again reinforcing that violence. That's what they're learning and that's what they know. So when they're out on the playground, if they're in a classroom, a situation comes up, the answer is violence because that's what they know.
That's the first thing that they opt to when they're in a stressful situation or bullying. And we all know that bullying is increasing in this country, and especially through Facebook. There's stories weekly on the news about the after effects of Facebook bullying and playground bullying. So it's gotten a lot more complicated as to solving those types of problems, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and again, you're looking at elementary school kids that are bringing weapons to school to protect themselves from other kids in the classrooms. To give you an example, one of the schools in Santa Ana, I spoke with the principal, and she said that she's got a major problem at her school. She's had to suspend 41 kids since January. What does that do to? An increase in aggression, an increase in bullying, and so it starts at home and it's getting carried into the schools. And I have been doing some parenting groups and speaking to parents, and I've told them, if you think the news is bad now with what we're seeing with shootings across the United States, it's only going to get worse. Wait 10 years from now and see what the news is going to look like in 10 years.
So do you think that there's any way that we can, stopping it would be wonderful if we could do that, but I mean it's kind of unrealistic in the world that we're living in now. Do you think that there's any way that we can make those statistics at least start going down or stabilizing?
Absolutely. First things first, there's got to be a lot of psychoeducation. There's got to be resources that are available to the parents to explain to them the ratings of video games. Also, as a parent, get more involved with your child. We have seen such a drastic change in our society from 50 years ago when we would be able to go out and play outside, and when the lights turn on, we come in the house. Nowadays, it's a lot different. This is a new generation, the entitled generation. They've been given a lot of leeway, and I think we need to bring the parents and the children back together, sitting down and having dinner with each other every night. Get involved in your child's life. Find out what's happening at school. I think the biggest impact that we can make as parents is to, when you see your child on the computer or on a video game for hours at a time, sit down and look at the video game that they're playing. Sit down next to them on the computer and see, what are they playing? Who are they talking to? What websites are they going to? That's a very crucial thing. And the other thing is to limit the amount of time they spend on video games, TV, computer. Get more active. Take them to the park. Take a soccer ball. Get them involved with sports. That's very crucial, and it's something a lot of parents will say, oh, I don't have time. That's where the priorities need to be relooked at. Exactly. Look at your priority, and your child should be your priority. And if you say that you don't have time, you need to make the time.
Exactly, I agree, most definitely. And give them choices. I mean, they need to have something different to do. Young minds need to be constantly going. And you're right. They need to be monitored, need to have different things to do, and different ways to do it also. And now, when you were on my radio broadcast, you had mentioned that there was a group that was doing some gang intervention sort of work.
Yes. In the County of Orange, there is a wonderful program through the District Attorney's Office, and it's called GRIP, which is Gang Reduction Intervention Partnership. And they have collaborated with several cities within Orange County and offer this program, and it's to reach the elementary school kids at the elementary school level so that they can make an impact on these children before they get involved in gangs. And again, a lot of times, well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons why children get involved in gangs is because there's something missing within the family. Both parents are working 2 or 3 jobs, trying to get by. The children are left at home. They end up meeting gang members, and the gang members are the ones who give them the attention and the love, what they think is attention and love, and that's how they get involved. So with the GRIP program, it's getting law enforcement, police officers involved with the schools, having more availability, more access to law enforcement, where kids are no longer afraid to approach a police officer. And it's been awesome to see the experience with my husband, because before, when he drove up to the school, the kids would run away. And now that he's been in this program, when he drives up to the school, kids run to him. And it's been a big, big dramatic change, not only in the involvement of the kids, but even at the front office, they have statistics of how many times kids are being sent to the office for bad behavior. And the statistics are showing a huge drop in kids getting in trouble at school. So I think it's a great partnership, and hopefully it's going to continue.
I agree, and hopefully we have more of those programs out there, because that is really the age that we want to start working with our children, is when they're young and their brains are still forming, and they're starting to form their own social networks of sorts. That's where we want to get in and start doing the work, definitely. Can you talk about a little bit of the work that you've done so far with troubled little ones?
Well, I mean, again, a lot of it has to do with the parents and a lot of psychoeducation. You have to kind of explain to the child how it's affecting them. And that's really important at the level of a child where he can understand, is to explain the negative effects. But again, you have to be working very closely with the parents, and at times I would tell the parents, you need to take away the video games from them, and they would say, am I allowed to do that? Of course, you're the parent, you're in control, you need to take charge of what's happening in your household. The other thing too, when you're dealing with small children in therapy, we do a lot of play therapy, and we're working with Legos and drawings and stuffed animals. And it was interesting to see one of my 9-year-olds, we were playing Uno, and with one of the cards, he started slamming it on the table saying, "Die, people, die, die." So again, just in a plain game of Uno, his aggression was coming out due to the number of hours that he was spending killing people in the video game. And again, to try to explain to him how that is negatively affecting him, his relationships at school, his grades were obviously suffering because he was spending more time on the video games than on his schoolwork. So it all ties together, and it comes around, and getting the parents involved, having them monitor again, getting to be more involved in their child's life is just critical.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely working with the family system as much as possible, because we only see the kids maybe 1 hour a week and that's it. And then hopefully the parents are going to be cooperative to come in and work with us also. And for them to change their habits and the way that they do the day-to-day life at home can be a little bit tricky. And what are some of the techniques that you recommend to some of the parents that you've worked with?
Well, I think a lot of times what works best is the token economy and having some kind of reward system. And it doesn't have to be money, it doesn't have to be expensive, but one of the things that I would tell the parents, the video games that they do have, go to GameStop, Games for Less, turn them in and get appropriate games. And that could be an incentive for the child if they're doing well in school, if they're doing well in their behavior. Well, at the end of the week, we're going to go trade this video game in for something that's more appropriate for their age. So incentives like that are very helpful. And again, for rewarding them with positive things for their good behavior is one way to start. But there's so many other things that, they could do. Another reward could be to go to the park or have an activity with their friend.
Right.
An activity with their friend.
Old-fashioned techniques of having fun with your children. And it's worthy for both parties. It's a lot of fun to go out with your kids and just do what you used to do when you were a kid, and I think they really appreciate it too. They may not show it at first, of course, because they're children, but
yes.
But it's changing the habits slowly but surely.
Absolutely.
And we'll start talking about a little bit more of those techniques.
My name is Dr. Saggart. I'm a board-certified psychiatrist. I can provide medication management, psychotherapy, either individually or in group setting, and also I provide couple therapy. I have experience working with severely mentally ill patients, as well as substance abusers and highly functioning people. My website address is www.drsaggart.com.
Hi, welcome back to Psych 1-on-1 on therapycable.com. I'm Julianne Goode with Elizabeth Rivas. We are discussing violence and youth in America today. And the next question I'd like to ask you, Elizabeth, is what contributing factors does domestic violence have?
Well, I don't need to reinvent the wheel about this, and there's a lot of research out there, but domestic violence plays a huge role in the development of children. I like that the laws have been changed to include where if there is domestic violence, then that's considered child abuse, because it does make an impact on the child for the rest of their life. We do have statistics showing that children who witness domestic violence are learning that behavior and in the future may also become an offender of domestic violence. And I always tell my parents, everything that we do in our home is what we're teaching our children. So if there's violence in the home, that's what you're teaching your children. But if there's love in your home, you're also teaching that to your children. So it's so important to be a good role model, to have a good, healthy environment within the home. And also, where are your kids going to? If they're going next door to Bobby's house, is there domestic violence going on over there? Again, being proactive in knowing where your children are at and what they're doing is very important as a parent to get really involved in your child's lives.
Yeah, ask the important questions, definitely. And ask often, even if they feel like it's irritating, which they often will, as we know as parents. But you're right. With domestic violence situations, with domestic violence in a home, there really needs to be a stop put to it, because even if there isn't any kind of physical violence going on, just verbally fighting and not taking the situation and dealing with it appropriately is teaching your child also those miscommunication habits, and that it dominoes. It's a multi-generational situation with a lot of families nowadays, and I think just to come to the awareness that this can stop, you can go get help for it, and you can start modeling better communication, and having a healthier home environment is so crucial. We cannot let our school systems reparent our children. That's not what they're there for. They're there to educate our children, not to be sitting there and teaching the essential social skills that they should really be learning at home.
The other thing, too, that I think we need to touch upon is the mental health effects of what happens to children who are being exposed to domestic violence, to the video games. A lot of the kids that I was seeing, a lot of them were coming in for symptoms of depression, isolation. They didn't want to play with friends anymore. So there's a lot of symptoms that go along with the negative effects. It's not just being more aggressive in the schoolyard against other siblings, but there's also the depression aspect. And as adults, we know when we're sad. We know when we're feeling low and we just are feeling depressed, but kids don't know how to tell you, I'm feeling depressed. Their symptoms come across very differently, and it can include things like stomach aches, headaches, they're just not feeling well. Those are signs as a parent that you need to say something's going on and we need to address it. And the longer you wait, the more difficult and the more depressed the child will get as well.
Mm-hmm. And in that case, really, they need to be taken to the pediatrician and checked out, just to make sure that there's nothing physical going on first. That's really important to have that in line also.
Yeah, because the last thing you want to do is put your child on antidepressants at the age of 10. So, the sooner you see the changes in your child, maybe they're not eating like they used to, you're just seeing different characteristics that they weren't displaying before, locking themselves in their room. Those are the things as a parent that you need to be really aware of.
Yeah, and definitely I agree with Elizabeth. It needs to be taken care of as much as possible and as soon as possible, because when you can get in earlier and see these signs and see the red flags, it's much, much easier to get in and get help for that person. And there's so many resources out there today that, even if you just want to call up and ask general questions of a mental health practitioner such as ourselves, there's a lot of therapists that are open for asking those types of questions and addressing those concerns, and also doing a lot of research on the internet. There is a ton of information out there right now that is for anybody to access. So make use of those resources and do something as soon as possible. So as your experience of being a correctional officer, and now being a therapist. How have those two careers been meshing and changing your perspective of the work that you do?
Oh, I feel so privileged to have been in the different positions that I have been in. Not only working in a jail as a corrections officer and being exposed to talking to inmates about their lives, about where they came from, about their environment, how they ended up where they were, to the other spectrum of the victim. My AA is in criminal justice and my BA and master's is in psychology. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to bring my experience to use when I was a sexual assault victim advocate with the district attorney's office, because one thing is to look at the corrections background, to look at the field of corrections, and another thing is to look at the actual criminal justice system, of the actual jury trial, of the process, of the pre-trials, the arraignments, all of the steps that go into from the time the crime is committed to the time the inmate is sentenced and sent away to prison. It's been very eye-opening for me to see every step of the way. And to have that knowledge helps me as a therapist, because I'm able to explain and to educate victims who have no idea what the process is, which is very extensive. And it's just made me such a more educated person to be exposed to every aspect of the criminal justice system.
And how fortunate it is for a person who has been victimized and has to go through that court system, for you to be therapizing them and working with them through that whole process, because you know what's coming up. You can educate them. You can help to alleviate a lot of the anxiety that they're going through, because it is a really extensive, complicated process.
Yes, it is.
That most of us would get involved with. We'd just be mind-boggled.
Absolutely. There's so many misconceptions, and to talk to a victim and explain what their rights are and what they're going to be going through, and to tell them that this could take 2 to 3 years, they're just completely overwhelmed with the system and how things work and how things are delayed. So to have that knowledge is so empowering for the victim, because it's no longer a mystery. Someone's able to sit down and talk to them and explain to them the process and to answer any of their questions. And like you said, there's so many resources out there available to victims, available to kids who need help. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Be proactive. And I think we're sounding like a record, but being proactive in your child's life is so critical. And there's things that you can do as a parent and just get involved.
Right. And don't be afraid to step up to that plate and take charge in your own household. You really have to do that. Kids need to have boundaries set for them. They're not young enough to be doing that kind of systematic day-to-day structuring of their own lives. You need to do it for them as being the adult and the parent in the household. Because I think a lot of the parenting nowadays is more of a let's take a step back and let the child do whatever he or she wants to do. And in my opinion, I don't agree with that. You need to have set rules and structures. It doesn't need to be hard and fast, but it needs to be for the greater good of your own child. because you're sending that child out to the world more hours a day than you probably see him or her during the day. And you need to have enough love and concern to make sure that that child is going to be well set for the rest of his or her life.
Yes, and I love the word advocate, because that's exactly what we are. As a teacher, as a parent, as someone who supervises the playground, we are all advocates for these children who can't advocate for themselves. So everyone has a role, and I love that saying that it takes a village to raise a child. I agree with that 100%. It does take a village. Even if you don't have kids, if you see something wrong, step in, say something, and advocate for an innocent child that may not be able to advocate for themselves.
It's beautifully put, and we are part of that village. And this is why we're here on therapycable.com. This is Psych One-on-One. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with you.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
Hi, we're back with Psych One-on-One on therapycable.com. Thank you for joining us. I'm Julianne Goode with Elizabeth Rivas, and we're continuing our discussion on youth violence in America and tips that we can take with us as to doing some preventative work within our own communities. So Elizabeth, what would you recommend to adults in general if they see a child that's disturbed, maybe showing signs that violence is impacting their lives?
I think, and again, psychoeducation is such a great thing, because the resources that are available out there are there for the community, and I think getting that child help as soon as possible is critical to stopping the violence, stopping that learned behavior, and posing a better future for that child. I think, as teachers, as educators, bus drivers, anybody that sees something is wrong, bring it to somebody's attention that can influence, maybe speaking to the parents, getting the parents involved, getting the principal involved from the school, depending on the environment that you see the child is acting out. So it really kind of depends on what kind of role you have in the child's life.
Mm-hmm. And again, taking that village perspective, if you're seeing a young child that's having problems, a lot of times they'll have school counselors now, or somebody that at least the school can refer the family to, and at no cost, low cost, whatever works for the family's budget, and getting that little person in there as soon as possible. Now, I know that you've worked with really small children, and I think you've mentioned before that the youngest person that you worked with was around 6 years old and stuff. What kind of symptoms would you typically see within a little person that's 5, 6 years old that might be suffering from some violence at home, whether it's exposure through the media or from home or just their neighborhood?
Well, many times, and I'd like to mention a couple resources, South Coast Children's Society, Western Youth Services, both of these organizations work with children. So again, there's resources out there. Many of the resources and the referrals that we would get would be from the school because they're having problems in the classroom, they're having problems in the playground, they're very aggressive, they're hitting other children. At the age of 6, you still do see a lot of the typical aggressive behaviors. And again, they're not able to verbalize like an adult would be able to, so you would see a lot of even just playing with their toys, throwing the toys at people, at the parents, hitting the parents is very common among young children. Throwing tantrums would be another thing that they might do to either get attention, to, again, I'm frustrated, how am I going to cope? I'm going to hit because that's what I've learned, that's what I've seen, and that's another way that they're trying to express how they're feeling is through hitting, through violence, and again, on the negative side of the symptoms, not eating, again, isolating themselves from other children. When all the kids are playing together, that child will not be playing with them. They'll go in the corner and just play by themselves. So there's a lot of things to look for. And again, if you see an unusual pattern where your child used to sleep 8 hours a night and then all of a sudden he's waking up with nightmares, is having a hard time going to sleep, any changes in their regular routine is something that you should be concerned about.
So that's the red flags going up. And that, you're right, they do not have the adult capability of communicating with you. They have their own language. And sometimes if you're concerned or you're intuitively saying something has changed here and you don't quite know what it is and the child's not telling you, again, reach out to your community and try to figure it out as much as possible, and don't just dismiss it that it will go away, because a lot of times it can get worse. It can snowball, and then you had an initial problem and then it becomes a huge problem, and then it takes a lot longer to solve that problem.
Another thing too is you don't want to mistake their symptoms or their behaviors and you automatically say, oh, it's depression, or oh, it's this, because there's so many new things that are happening with children. Autism is on the rise, and it might be a developmental issue. Maybe they're having hearing problems. So I think an important thing to do is, like you said earlier, is to take them to a pediatrician and make sure that there's no medical things that are going on. So again, being proactive to know the healthy things about your child and then things that don't seem so normal to you, or things that are changing drastically as well.
Mm-hmm. So those are some of the preventative tips. And I'd like to talk a little bit about gain influence on children that may come from neighborhoods who are saturated with violence, or their parents may be involved in gangs also.
I have a story I want to share, and it's about a school that it's in the heart of Santa Ana, and these children, again, it's normal for them to hear gunshots at nighttime. It doesn't faze them anymore. They get used to it. But my husband was telling me a story about how there was a shooting in front of a school, and all the teachers, who were all Caucasian, who probably live in Lake Forest or Mission Viejo, were very scared and stressed out. And the kids were completely not shocked. It was just another thing, something that happens on a daily basis in their neighborhoods. So they weren't fazed by it whatsoever. Where the teachers who don't live in that environment were the ones who were, oh my gosh, what's happening? And you could tell the difference in the reaction of the teachers and the children. And again, it's your environment. It's what's normal to you on a daily basis. So for them to hear gunshot wounds or to hear gunshots and people getting injured, to see drug deals happen on their street, that's the norm. That's what they're used to. The gangsters are getting smarter. Instead of carrying weapons, and when a patrol officer comes by and stops them, they don't want to go to jail. So they don't want to go to jail, so are carrying the weapons for them. So here's these fourth graders that have guns or knives or drugs, and they're having these children deliver drugs on their behalf because they don't want to get caught. So again, if there's a child that's vulnerable, that doesn't have a lot of attention at home, is out on the streets, they're going to get swooped up by these gang members and they're going to be used in possible criminal activities. And again, it's not as fast as you think. They groom them very slowly. They may buy them things in the beginning, gain their trust, come around them a lot, give them that attention, and they eventually bring them in and they just rein them in a little bit at a time. So we do have a lot of families where kids are born into a gang. That's just the lifestyle. It happens all the time, especially in Santa Ana. So it's hard to get them away, but as a parent, as a teacher, someone from the school, getting them involved in sports, getting them involved in the Boys and Girls Club after school, anything positive, anything that's going to get them away from that extra time that a gang member can access them would be amazing.
Yeah, especially after school time when I would imagine the rates for crimes go up because the kids are bored. They're out on the streets, they're latchkey children, and they're bored. They want to go out and hang out with whoever is cool at the moment. And I agree with you. The Boys and Girls Club is fantastic. I work there down in Laguna Beach, and they do a great job with the children. And they're just an amazing crew. So again, get into the resources. Find some other things for your children to do so they don't become vulnerable to becoming victims of violence and getting in and trying to prove themselves when they're just crying for help underneath is a huge issue. And I agree, we need to be more proactive as a village and be advocates for all of our children because they are our future. So would you like to add anything else as we're closing up, Elizabeth?
Well, we didn't get a chance to talk about the media and how television also is huge in influencing not only ourselves as adults, but the very young minds of our children. So again, if they're seeing something on TV that's inappropriate, sit down and talk to them about why it's inappropriate. Don't just let it slide, but engage your child in that conversation. That's really important.
I agree, totally. And I'd like to thank you for joining us for Psych 101 on therapycable.com with Elizabeth Rivas and myself, Julianne Goode. And look into more of our programs on therapycable.com. We have a large variety of programs that you and your family and friends could be interested in. And we're going to be keeping on doing this for a while. So join us whenever you can. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself and take care of each other. Bye now.